Okay, so I'm going to make a video of Daniel Garrett's game. It is February 11th, 2023. He just got done playing a game against Mr. James Allen, who is a candidate master or expert, 21-14. So pretty darn close to being a master, less than 100 points away. Daniel's trying to get to master. He's now at 1980. Hopefully it'll be over 2000 when this tournament is concluded, the Minnesota Open. I've got a chess set in front of me, even though I've got the chess set on the screen, so I'm not going to be looking at the camera a great deal. Analysis is better done on a chessboard rather than being done on a screen. So I'm just going to use this to follow the moves along to see where we're going. I'm also recording this not just to share it with Daniel, but for the people who are on Team TUI at Bishop McLaughlin Catholic High School. Maybe this will help their chess as well. But if you are not on Team TUI, Team Dell, this is being made only for Team TUI members, to give you a chess advantage. So lay off. All right, so Daniel plays d4, and the opponent plays e6. Now this is a very interesting setup because of the flexibility d6 gives you. You can play all sorts of things on this. I really wish I had the technology where I made moves on the chessboard that would make moves on the screen. But there are a couple of different things that white can do here. So for example, one of the things I do, I play e6. One possible opening, of course, is the French defense, which, goes to e4 and then goes to d5. And I imagine that if he had played e4, I would imagine that d5 would have been the move, striking back at the center. But I don't think Daniel wants to do that. And then, of course, there's other things that can be done as well. So, for example, if c4, right, which is what Daniel does play, after c4, there's a couple of major moves. d5 leads into the queen's gambit declined. And then, of course, he doesn't even have to do that at all. He can simply play knight to f6, and then if knight to f6, then it can lead into many, many different kinds of things, including the king's gambit declined, including lots of different possible openings. So there's lots of stuff that's available here, but I think that c4, right, it avoids the French defense, and it gives the opportunity to still lots of flexibility here for black. Black has a lot of different things that it can do. Probably the least committal move in this position is probably knight f6, but obviously d5 is a very good move as well. There are other moves that that are worth thinking about. There are other moves that are worth thinking about. I mean, if you were to look at the table base here, the opening book, knight f6 is the clear first choice. But, there are other moves available. Now, there's f5. This is the Dutch defense, and this is what he plays, what Mr. Allen plays. But, what's also interesting is there are some other ideas available too, right? The b6 is the Queen's Indian defense, right? Or actually, it's called the English defense. Interesting. But it's an interesting possibility as well. And I was also curious about bishop b4. This is called the kangaroo defense, which is interesting, but it can lead into some interesting stuff. And then also, I was also curious about c5, right? And this is called this is still in the Horwitz defense, but after you get into this line, you see that it is, it can lead into some very, very interesting stuff, right? So there's a lot of different possibilities in Grandmaster chess, to play. But the important thing that happens is that it goes with f5, which is the Dutch defense. Now, there are a lot of different ways you can play against the Dutch. The Dutch, of course, is characterized by this f5 move. So if it had been more of a traditional Dutch, it would have been d4 and then f5 immediately. But that gives white a little bit more options. And I really do like the e6 option because I think that, gives you a little bit more flexibility with what you want to do. Um, so, for example, if you had played f5 right away, um, you know, then I feel like that choreographs what you're doing a little bit, and it gives white the opportunity to try to, if we look at the, it's, then it can play g3 right away, and I feel like this is just better for white. But anyway, let's get back to the actual game here. So c4, f5, the Dutch defense. And what Daniel plays is the immediate g3, which is the move that is oftentimes considered the best test of the Dutch defense. It seems like a kind of an odd move to be the best defense against the Dutch defense, because you might think that the best move would be to play out the knight and then prepare e4, right, to challenge the center. But what this move does is it gives this really good potential at dominating these light squares that that black is going to have a difficult time pressuring without the aid of those pawns, right? So this is kind of an interesting way to go about it. I don't know why, all the reasons why this is the best. The other thing we need to understand is now that f5 is played, knight f6 is coming, right? And that's going to put further pressure on the light squares. And, this pin is very possible in this position, but totally not necessary. So knight f6, right? Completely solid. And then bishop g2, right? And so here we have of course, the person who played the game is messaging me now. It says he now has black against a master, 2248, next round. So we'll text good luck to Mr. Garrett and hope that he is going to play as well as he did last round. So bishop g2 and then bishop b4, right? So bishop g2, bishop b4, check. Black is, it makes total sense, right? It's a developing move with check. Yeah, I mean, another really good move in this position that I would see would probably be bishop to e7. I think that move would be just fine. I'm looking at the moves here, common moves among masters, and bishop b7 is very common, along with c6 and d5, right? So after bishop g2, both c6 and d5 are common moves here. So this move, it's definitely playable, and there are two major responses to this move, and they're both to d2, and that is the bishop d2 and the knight to d2 are good responses. And I think Daniel's choice, bishop g2, is a really, really interesting response. And I like the response because, if black doesn't want the exchange, then he has to make an additional move with a loss of time, right? So, let's say he just goes back, because I don't think he's going to go back here. It cramps him. So let's say he goes back here, and then white just has a free move, right? And or one of the ways, knight c3, knight f3, both equally good, but white is clearly better here because of the time, right? And after the capture, which is exactly what happens, which is about what is about to happen, then if you think about the capture, you have a choice between queen takes d2 and knight takes d2. Queen is better, and the reason why queen is better in this position is because, and if you look at the board, it's a matter of developed pieces, right? The queen is developed now somewhat because it's off its original square. It makes it easier for white to connect the rooks, right? It still has to develop the knights, but those are going to come shortly. And it allows this knight, because even though sometimes you don't want to move the queen, and I do like this move. I think it looks good. I like the way it attacks e4 and c4, But there's no threat on the c4 pawn. There's no reason to be defending the c4 pawn. So because of that, the better move, of course, is to go here, excuse me, to take with the nut. Because once, we'll just for giggles, we'll say castle, and then knight c3. Not only does it allow for the c4, right, but or the e4, but it also, gives some good pressure on these squares as well. It's a more active square for the knight. So that's why the queen taking is better. But that's not what black chooses to do. Mr. Allen plays queen e7, hoping for a capture. Now, a capture would not be good, right? So, for example, capture, right? Queen takes b4, check, and then, I just can't see this as being a good line. I mean, so queen d2, of course, to not lose the pawn, and again, that just seems like a bunch of wasted time. I don't see that as being the issue. So it looks like it's trying to win a pawn one way or the other, right? So if take, queen takes, if the knight comes over, then the queen wins the pawn, and there don't seem to be enough pieces or development for where there's any serious opportunities to trap this piece. Right? That doesn't seem to happen. So that's a free pawn for black. And even though there's some time wasted there, if we check the engine, it says it's about even. So black's not up a pawn, but that doesn't seem correct. That doesn't seem correct to me anyway. But what I like about this move, and I really do, what I like about is, it definitely seems to be an unusual path, right? It doesn't seem to be the typical path for the chess. And so that, I see someone who probably has played this opening before, who understands here's a position that maybe is not as well known, it's off book, it's a way of, playing good developmental chess, but without, staying super deep into theory. But the thing is that white does the absolute best thing that white can do, which is just to ignore it, right? There's no need to ignore it. Now, while the computer likes knight h3, I don't really see it. I think that knight f3, preparing the castle, attacking the center is absolutely fine. So knight h3, and then knight e4, right? When we see this, we see this attack on the bishop, right? The attempt to try to get some good exchanges for the black pieces, but then after a3, it's not going to be that simple. So what happens is a3, and then knight takes bishop, knight takes, and then knight takes. And the beautiful thing about this knight takes, of course, is that it's opening up the bishop on g2, which is great. And he can exchange this piece if he wants. He's going to have to move it one way or the other. He definitely can't move it back, right? So, for example, here, this is a clear loss because after b5, comes the loss of material because of this, right? There's no way. So, and again, there's no way out this way either because of this, right? There's simply no good way to retreat the bishop. So what does that mean? It means after this move, this exchange is necessary, and he still gets this very good natural development. And white will be far better developed than black. There's a clear early advantage out the gate for the white pieces. Now, an interesting question would be, what if the bishop takes first, right? Now, are you still going to take with this knight, or are you going to take with this knight? And I think you still take with this knight because you're now threatening to win a pawn. So you're either going to force this piece back or force it to make an exchange, which if it does, you end up in the same position. But again, you're still better. It seems like the right thing to do. All right, so knight e4, there were definitely some ways this could have gone wrong. There are definitely some ways this could have gone wrong, I think. For example, what if he just tried to check here? And now you have this check, and I I just don't see it. Um, Maybe it still can be okay, but I think this is going to be pretty bad. Yeah, I mean, black is now slightly better, even though the black does not get the rook, you know, um, yeah, that's pretty rough. Um, so, instead you probably go this way. Instead, you still have this capture. Maybe this is what happens. But again, black's got kind of an interesting attack here. So I think that the way things went was pretty darn good. So anyway, let's get back to the actual game. And so what I see, in this position where, I'm looking at the actual board now, and if I were having a conversation with my chess teacher, Repka, I think that he would just be like, I like white. Just look at the difference. Black's one move away from castling, white's one move away from castling, but the biggest difference is just look at the difference of the development of the pieces, right? Um, White's going to develop this piece to a natural square. Um, Black's bishop is pretty bad, like getting that bishop involved right now in terms of the game is going to be very difficult, precisely because even though the material is even, white definitely has an advantage. These pawns make this bishop's life difficult. This knight, even developing to its natural square, attacks squares that are defended. And so neither of these pieces have good development. White and black will castle equally. The queens are both involved. But if you look at, white's knight by contrast, knight c3, e4 is coming. The knight has an opportunity to exercise a lot of good pressure on the board very soon. So this developmental advantage is likely to improve black's chances in the game. So white castles kingside, or black castles kingside, which is absolutely necessary, and then knight c3, and white is pretty darn close to white's now pretty darn close to finishing development. Black plays d6, which makes complete sense. He's creating a small center, right, of defense, to try to counter what white is doing. And then, interestingly enough, white has a choice, the difference between castling between kingside or queenside, and Daniel, I think, makes the bolder choice to castle queenside. Why castle queenside? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. Black is castled queenside, and an opposite color castling gives him an opportunity to push these kingside pawns and come directly for black's king. I like it. Now, the thing is, defensively, there's no doubt that this is a better position for white. It's more stable. It's not going to be particularly hard for white to gain space on the queen side. And there's already some activity there with the bishop and with the knight. But I think that this position, this unbalancing of the game in terms of human chess, there is this semi-open file here. This pawn is not here. And so there will be an opportunity for black to swing its rooks over and push the queenside pawns and attack. It does give black a better game plan, but white is confident with the superiority of the development and the opportunities, and the fact that the king already does have an exposed light square, right? And you have to understand that this diagonal, which is open for white, involves a bishop that's not on the board. And, if the king moves over, he does have a light squared bishop, but it's not going to be that easy to get on there. So I don't know. In human chess, I think this works out. I really do. So knight d7. And yeah, I mean, that just makes perfect sense to me. And then e4. And here we go. I mean, white is immediately attacking the center, right? If they trade the pawns off, it seems like it's a pretty, even though this can open this up for black, in a simple, f takes e4, and this can go either way. Bishop takes e4, knight takes e4. I probably would have played knight takes e4. I don't know if that's as good, but the simple idea is, even if black can try to attack along this file, So can white, and white's more developed, right? These pieces are going to be at home much longer. So opening up the position actually favors white. Now Daniel here plays, interestingly enough, after the capture, plays bishop takes, and I think that's really interesting. He's attacking the king, but what he's also doing is he's anticipating something pretty well that I think is really well done. Black plays this very natural move. Now this is a good move because it attacks the center, it attacks the bishop, and also is defending the king. Right, very good move. But then Daniel plays his bishop to c2. I wonder if he was thinking that. Like, was he thinking about the entire thing? Because from here it does keep the knight more off this square, perhaps. But by going here and then anticipating this and this piece is now just a rock star. Why is this piece a rock star? Because this diagonal is not going to be easily obstructed. Not at all. It's going to be very, very difficult for black to obstruct that. And now the bishop is now covering, is standing as a defender for the king. So that this bishop is just doing so much work for the king, and that's just really great. I mean, that's just a really wonderfully placed piece. It's hard for a piece to get better placed than that, I think. Forgive me if I'm just rambling for a while, Daniel. I mean, I'm trying to teach my students here. Okay. So then a6, right? And with a6, the attack on the king side or on the queen side, the black has to begin. The idea of a6, of course, is a6 b5. It's going to try to distract this pawn and then open up the c file to come after white's king. It's simple chess, simplicity itself. And then, of course, after h4, white's intention is to push the pawns and go after black's king. What's really cool about this game is this is, it's just kind of basic chess, right? Like this is what good chess is, right? I mean, it's not master level chess. I mean, it's really close to master level. I mean, both of these guys are borderline masters, but this is what intelligent, thoughtful chess is, and it's not necessarily complicated. All right, so b5 is what's coming right after. And what white decides to do, I mean, it's semi-risky, but he's going to take that pawn, right? And he's going to look to maybe target these pawns. I mean, they're defended right now. He's not going to. But the idea is that the king can get over, and he's making a bet that there are a couple of bets that white's making here by opening this position up. Number one, he's deciding to take the material. Number two, he thinks that his pieces around the king can move over and get off the file. He thinks that he can defend his king. And now, right, if you take all the pieces off the board, right, if you were to somehow, look at all this position with everything off the board, take all the pieces off, meaning, you were to imagine that every single one of these pieces was all of a sudden to disappear off of the board. This is a win for white. With everything off the board, with all the pieces off the board, now this is a win for white because white has what's called the outside passer. So let's just actually have a look at this for a second. Let's be clear about what this means. So I'm going to add a new chapter and I'm going to edit the board, right? And by editing the board, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete all of the non-pawns and the non-kings off of the board, and we're going to create a new game. And even though it's black to move, right? I mean, white is just winning far and away, right? Because, right, if you look at what white can do, right, I think the simplest way to win is simply the fact that, I mean, if this game were white to move, right, then it would just be ball game. Just for example, right, if he just moves this is super easy to win because then the black king is not in the box, right? And because the black king is not in the box, then he can win. But the point is this outside passer, right? He has to make this move immediately just to get into the box. But, his advantage of the outside, if you take all these pieces off the board, he has a very easy advantage. So we'll just play computer versus computer for a moment and see how, this game really, becomes pretty simple for white to win. Uh, you know, if he takes it, then this game is just won this way, because now he'll mop up the pawns and win, right? Like this is just this positional threat, right, is just too great. So in the long term, right, what we see, in the long term is now white can win a couple of ways, right? White can win by just getting all the pieces off the board. He can win with his kingside attack. He can win with his more active pieces, right? But I think black needs to do this. I do think that black needs to do this. I think he needs to get these rooks over, and I think he needs to accelerate this counterattack. And this is also exciting chess, too. Bishop b7, obviously this is a strong move. But I think the problem is, I think it interferes with this rook here. I'm not entirely sure this is where this bishop belongs. I could be completely wrong about this, but I'm not entirely sure at all that this is where this piece belongs. And I could be completely ignorant here, but the thing is that, I think bishop a6 is a fine move as well. Maybe I'm wrong. I think getting both of the rooks over there is a very good idea. I think that this move, while it is a strong move, it attacks this stuff. I think it also gives white the opportunity just to make a simple, strong developmental move that it wants to make anyway, right? Like I think that's a move that white wants to make anyway and doesn't cost any particular time. After 94, right, we see what's going on. There is the double attack on this pawn. And, obviously the queen is attacked as well, so you have to deal with one or the other. And so just deals with it. And now it's bishop versus knight, right? And maybe for that reason, maybe black has made a really nice combination, because now black has a factor, right? He's got this really well placed bishop, right? And if he can get rooks over, especially if he can clear this c pawn somehow, maybe there's a really interesting attack that black has in store. But the thing is, white has an attack as well, and white also has the material. This, of course, threatens more than a trade because of the thing here. So, very, very good stuff. This is really good chess here. He has to play c4. There's nothing really else to do. And then d5, right? Obviously, you can't take this pawn, right? It just loses material. So d5, and now where does the bishop go, right? Well, he just plays e5, right? But the bishop is now semi-trapped. And then f4, again, you can push it if you want, but it's not going to help anything. Can't take it, right? I mean, this position is now looking really, really good for white. So I'm now almost 30 minutes in. I'm going to end this recording. I know it probably wasn't very useful for you, Daniel, but hopefully this kind of thing is useful for my students. And so I'm going to end this and then upload it.